All right, so today we're going to do something pretty cool, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We're going back in time to the 1970s, New York City.
Ah, yes.
A city that was just crackling with creative energy, right?
Yeah.
And, out of this kind of cauldron of, I guess you could call it chaos,
Mm-hmm.
two, totally different genres of music were born. Punk and rap.
Right.
And on the surface, they seem like total opposites, right?
Totally.
But their stories are actually super intertwined, which I think we're going to find is pretty fascinating as we kind of dig deeper.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first, I guess to really appreciate these two genres, we need to understand a little bit about the environment that birthed them, right?
Definitely New York City in the 70s. It was, like you said, a very chaotic time.
Yeah.
A lot of social and economic turmoil, poverty, crime.
Right.
People were really disillusioned with the state of things.
Yeah.
And all that unrest, that pressure cooker environment, it really fueled a lot of creativity and innovation, especially in the arts.
It's almost like the city itself was yearning for a new soundtrack.
Exactly.
Like a voice that could express these struggles and frustrations and the hopes of the people.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and so both punk and rap, in their own way, I think, became that voice for the city.
Totally.
So let's start with the punk scene.
Okay.
Can you even imagine, like, the sounds of the Ramones and Blondie, Television, Talking Heads?
Oh, yeah.
All of those bands coming out of clubs like CBGB's.
Legendary.
Yeah, it's legendary. So what was it about punk that made it such a force at that time?
Well, you had a lot of, popular music at the time that had become very, overblown, right? Big stadium rock bands.
Yeah.
And punk was this reaction against that.
Right.
They basically strip rock down to its bare bones, raw, unpolished, high energy, real DIY ethos, do it yourself.
Right.
So it was very much a rejection of that, kind of slick studio sound and then the whole, rock star image.
Right. So it was like more than just music, right? It was like a cultural movement.
Totally. It was anti-establishment.
Mm-hmm.
Punk was all about, kids forming their own bands, creating their own clothes, expressing themselves authentically without, needing any kind of permission or validation.
Yeah, like anyone could do it.
Exactly. You didn't need to be a virtuoso musician. You just needed passion and the guts to, break the rules.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So while all this was happening in like downtown Manhattan, with the punk scene up in the Bronx, a whole other revolution was brewing.
Yeah.
Rap music.
Exactly.
So paint us a picture of that scene up in the Bronx.
All right. So you got to imagine the Bronx back then. You got these block parties happening.
Okay.
And they weren't just parties. They were like musical laboratories.
Okay.
You had DJs like Kool Herc, and they weren't just playing records. They were manipulating them, using turntables as instruments.
Wow.
Yeah, he pioneered these techniques like scratching,
okay,
physically manipulating the vinyl to create these rhythmic sounds, and they'd extend the breaks.
Yeah.
The instrumental breaks in funk and soul records.
Oh, okay.
To create this like continuous danceable groove.
Right. So that's where like the whole idea of like breakdancing and all that stuff came from.
Exactly. It all comes from that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you've got these DJs creating these soundscapes, and then you have the MCs.
Okay.
MCs like Kokla Rock, and they would, grab the mic, hype up the crowd with these call and response chants, and eventually they started weaving in improvised rhymes.
Okay.
Over these beats.
Yeah.
And that fusion of turntablism and rhythmic vocal delivery.
Yeah.
That really formed the foundation of rap music.
That's fascinating. So these two worlds, right? Punk downtown and rap uptown.
Yeah.
Seem like miles apart, but they were really just a subway ride away from each other.
That's right. Just a few stops.
So that proximity must have played a role.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was almost inevitable that these two scenes would eventually collide.
Yeah.
They were both products of this, gritty urban reality, fueled by a similar energy, a desire to challenge the status quo. And then although their musical styles were very different, they shared this, rebellious spirit and this hunger for something new.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got these two movements, punk and rap, both born out of this kind of chaotic energy of 1970s New York.
Yeah.
So what happens when they collide?
That's a great question. We'll get into that right after the break.
We'll be right back.
So we were talking about punk and rap, these two really distinct sounds, both coming out of New York City in the 70s.
Yeah, both with this rebellious energy pushing back against the mainstream.
Exactly. But what happened when those worlds collided? Because collide, they did.
That's what I'm really curious about. Was it just a moment in time? Or did it have a lasting impact?
It definitely had a lasting impact. You can even argue that it changed the way we think about music, like what even constitutes a song.
Okay, so you're saying this wasn't just a fad, right? It was something bigger.
No, not at all. This was about pushing boundaries, creating a whole new sonic space where genres could just blend and mutate.
So it wasn't just a case of a punk band adding a rapper or a rap group throwing in some guitar riffs.
It was more than that. It was about a real artistic exchange, a deeper connection between these two scenes.
Okay, so can you give us an example, a specific band or song where we can really hear that fusion happening?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the Beastie Boys.
Oh, yeah, they were the epitome of that punk rap sound.
They really were. They weren't content to just be a punk band or a rap group, Their music became this wild genre-bending experiment.
I mean, even just their lyrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were funny, irreverent, and they didn't shy away from, pushing buttons.
Yeah, they definitely weren't afraid to provoke. But it was more than just provocation. They had this really clever way of, weaving social commentary into their music, Almost hiding it in plain sight.
And their sound, it was so raw and chaotic, but also, incredibly catchy.
Totally. Think about a song like Paul Revere. You've got these driving punk guitars, drum machines, storytelling rap verses, all blended together in a way that just completely flips the script on traditional song structures.
Yeah, it's like they were making up their own rules as they went along.
Exactly. And that sense of experimentation, that willingness to break the mold, that's really what defined that era.
So the Beastie Boys were obviously huge, but were there other bands that were kind of pioneering that punk rap sound?
Oh, for sure. I mean, you can't talk about this fusion without mentioning Run DMC's collaboration with Aerosmith on Walk This Way.
Oh, yeah. That was a massive hit.
It was huge. It really brought that punk rap sound to a mainstream audience.
What was it about that song that just, resonated with so many people?
I think it was that combination of hard rock riffs and rap verses, It was something totally fresh and unexpected.
And it just worked, right? The two styles just clicked together perfectly.
They did. And it proved that this fusion wasn't just some niche thing. It had the power to break down genre barriers and connect with people from all walks of life.
So beyond the music itself, did this fusion have a wider cultural impact?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It influenced fashion, art, even the way young people talked and interacted with each other. It was more than just music. It was a whole cultural movement.
I mean, you could see it in the clothes, right?
Yeah.
The baggy pants, the sneakers, the baseball caps.
It was this collision of punk's DIY aesthetic and hip-hop street style.
Yeah, it was a whole new visual language, a way for kids to express themselves and signal that they were part of this new movement.
Exactly. It was about rejecting the mainstream and embracing something more authentic, more rebellious.
So this punk rap thing, it wasn't just a musical trend. It was a cultural phenomenon.
It really was, but it wasn't without its challenges.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, anytime you have something that's so new and different, it's going to face some resistance, right? Some people just aren't ready for change.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
So who were the main critics of this fusion?
Well, you had some people within the punk scene who felt like it was, diluting the purity of punk, They saw rap as too commercial, too mainstream.
Interesting. And what about from the hip-hop side? Was there any pushback there?
Yeah, there were definitely some concerns about cultural appropriation, Some people felt like white artists participating in a genre that was so deeply rooted in Black and Latino culture was disrespectful or inauthentic.
So this fusion was kind of navigating a complex cultural landscape, trying to balance artistic expression with the concerns of these different communities.
Absolutely, and it wasn't always easy. There were missteps and misunderstandings along the way. But despite those challenges, this musical and cultural exchange kept evolving.
It's that desire for something new, something that defied easy categorization, was just too strong to ignore.
I think you're right. It tapped into a deeper hunger for authenticity, for self-expression, and ultimately, I think it made both punk and rap stronger and more vibrant.
Okay, so we've talked about the roots of punk and rap.
Yeah.
Seeing how they kind of crashed into each other in New York in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wild story, right? All this rebellion and innovation and this crazy fusion.
Absolutely.
We really challenged what music could be, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
But where does the story go from there, right? Like, what happens to this punk rap fusion? Does it just, like, fade away?
Well, I don't think it fades away. It kind of morphs and evolves.
Okay, so it's not like we can predict the next big hit or anything.
Not really, but I think what's more interesting is understanding, like, the core elements that make this blend so powerful.
Okay, so what are those core elements? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, for one, that DIY ethos we talked about earlier, right?
That's still huge. Punk was all about empowering people to create their own music, their own scenes, without needing, like, permission from the industry.
Exactly. And now with technology, you know, creating music is easier than ever.
So you're saying we could be on the verge of, like, a new wave of DIY punk rap artists?
I think it's definitely possible. The barriers to entry are so much lower now.
That makes sense. So what about the lyrics? Both punk and rap have always been about, like, raw expression, talking about real issues.
Yeah, that's a key part of it, right? This idea of using music as a platform to speak truth, challenge injustice, you know?
And that seems even more relevant today, right? With all this stuff going on in the world.
Absolutely. In a world that feels increasingly divided, music can be a powerful tool to connect with people.
Okay, so we've got DIY, we've got the lyrics. What else?
Well, I think we'll continue to see this cross-pollination of genres, you know. Punk and rap was just the beginning.
Yeah, like that initial fusion opened up a whole new world of possibilities.
Totally. Who knows what other musical mashups are out there just waiting to be discovered.
It's a thing to think about, right?
It is. Music is constantly evolving, and that's what makes it so cool.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into punk rap fusion, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away?
I'd say embrace the unexpected, you know. Don't be afraid to explore, to experiment.
Yeah, like don't let those genre labels hold you back.
Exactly. Keep an open mind. Keep listening. Keep creating.
That's the spirit of punk, the spirit of rap, and the spirit of this amazing fusion that we've been talking about.
And who knows, maybe one of our listeners out there will create the next groundbreaking sound.
Yeah, the future of music is wide open.
Yeah.
It's out there for the taking.
It is. So go out there and make some noise.
That's it for this deep dive. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, keep exploring, keep listening, keep creating.